I have mine, but mine's on. Well, hold on.
Is it on Don't Disturb?
No. It's
See,
definitely
Cal?
not.
Okay, so we got to do like every
Thank
time we
you.
do the check. Do we look okay? Is our
Yeah.
hair okay? Are
we
the mics
sound
are
okay?
the mics on?
Oh, there we go. Now we can hear
Are the
you.
mics on? What's our topic and are the phones off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, that's our checklist.
Although I feel like Kev's a little crooked, but that's fine. All right, let's get to it. Wing It Podcast, goosedigital.com, episode 59. Who do we have?
Robin Kroll.
Chris O'Neill. Kevin Butler.
Michael Turksani. What, did I get that wrong, Cam? No? Pretty good.
Well, I don't
60.
think it's 59. Yeah.
60. We turned 60 today.
Yeah.
68? Holy moly. All right. Almost 70. We're back in the podcast studio.
Yay.
Feels good.
Yeah. London, England. The Tube. No. Toronto.
We're not in London, England. No.
That would be nice, though.
Yeah. Well, Robin's going to London, England soon.
That's true.
Oh.
But today I'm not.
Yeah. This is pretty cool. Like, I can't... You guys are three-dimensional. I didn't realize you were three-dimensional.
It's been a while since we've done this in person.
Oh, it's been a while.
I wonder what episode.
Cam
was
would know.
last.
Cam would know. It's probably double. Be kind of cool if it was double. Yeah, somewhere in the 30s before we were here. So we're double vaxxed. I hope.
Things have changed.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Things have changed in the world
Yes.
since we were back in the office back in March 2020.
The world has changed.
Marketing has changed.
Yep.
Oh, good point.
Yeah. But we're still doing our podcast.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about how some of that change is affecting attribution.
Good topic.
This was Chris's topic because he's been closing a lot of deals lately and he wants to take credit for them all. So he's trying to figure out, how to best run his reporting and cut everyone out of the equation.
Now, as good marketers, we all know it's entirely because of marketing. So we're just not going to let them have the attribution.
Yeah.
That was the reason for this topic.
That's right.
I love how sales and marketing here are sitting across the table and the battle has begun.
No. We are aligned. He
Yeah.
just agreed with marketing.
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, attribution's changed because of some of the tweaks to first-party data coming up and going cookieless. So why don't we talk first just a little bit about what attribution means? So who wants to kick that off?
Robin, do you want to?
Sure. So when I think about marketing attribution, it's the ability to really understand when you're looking at your closed deals, being able to understand where they came from, where they started from, who actually drove them, and what were all the steps and the channels that were taken to lead to that close. So you want to be able to say that, this X percent of our revenue or our deals were actually driven from this particular marketing channel, first touch channel, or maybe last touch. But it's being able to understand the implication of your marketing activities and the results from your sales perspective. That's my take on attribution.
Okay, great. When I think of attribution, it's really interesting now in 2021 and moving forward. The buyer journey is unique and different for every lead and customer. No one really takes the same path, even if it's the same collection of touches or activities or interactions with an organization. And so that makes it challenging, one, to understand what's required in those touches, even how long they take in between touches and that general sales cycle. But I think probably the most important thing now is understanding there's the sort of the original source of the lead. And then there's what was the marketing initiative, sales initiative, what was that thing that happened that really drove it forward? Because it might not always be where it originated.
That's true.
I was looking at even some of our opportunities and won deals over the years. And
Mm-hmm.
there was a number of financial institution organizations that we now work with where we had actually sourced originally the very first touch 2 years prior at a trade show.
Right.
It just took that long to either cultivate or for their needs to really blossom into something that we can solve for. So I think there's a number of factors in there
Mm-hmm.
when you think about attribution of, original source versus, I don't know, what kind of moved it forward in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I like that. Chris, what's your take?
So understanding that attribution is important because that sort of helps to plan and strategize around the things that have worked, that will, that have been working,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of help to plan what we should do going forward. So like, for example, to Kev's point, I was thinking about some of the opportunities that, eventually put their hands up. So we
Mhm.
were nurturing them through a go-to-market program. They were consuming our emails or consuming our newsletters. In some cases, consuming some of our webinars. Getting sort of familiar with us until eventually they had a need that they realized we could fill.
Mm.
And that was because of the branding that we were doing, the education that we were doing, and that led to the hand going up, which is when we can jump on that opportunity and sort of walk them through the process. So understanding that level of education and awareness development
Mhm.
is so important. Sometimes that's missed. So what's happening today a lot is trying to understand exactly how it is that a marketing program be put together, how exactly to sort of set up your marketing plan in alignment with sales so that you can continue to refine and develop that go-to-market program in such a way that it's got the right balance of branding and connection with the customer.
What's challenging in that branding and awareness stage, if you think of, your classic sales funnel, sales and marketing funnel, is some of it's measurable and some of it's not. And I think one of the things that's happened, particularly in digital marketing over the years, is the ability to measure everything. If you think of like a standard keyword campaign, you really can kind of get a sense of cost per click, cost per conversion, cost per customer. And yeah, it's like that direct response marketing.
Mhm.
I think branding and awareness is interesting, particularly when you think of a go-to-market. And Robin's awfully familiar with our insurance go-to-market, but some of it's measurable. We can collect a number of leads at a trade show and we can
Mhm.
measure how many of them are good. But then there's other things that we do to be relevant in the market, to contribute to the community there that we can't measure.
Mhm.
We're very pro-marketing at this company, and I recognize some of the organizations out there listening or ones that we even work with, they don't give marketing the same sort of pass. So they want to be able to see and attribute. We
Everything.
sponsored this, I don't know, award show in a particular industry. Like, what does that get us? And
Mhm.
I don't think
Mhm.
anyone can authentically say,
Well, I
it
think
gets you this.
it is tough, and when I think of attribution, it's maybe from the people writing the checks, right? I think you look at
Mhm.
it's easy to look at these channels individually and say, well, what is LinkedIn getting us, or what is Google getting us, or what is Facebook or our email programs getting us. And I think you talked about these multi-touches or just how all these things are working together. And I think it's so easy to look at one of those and say, well, let's shut it down. It's not
Mhm.
doing anything, right? And when I look at the ability to say, well, we've got so much revenue that closed in this year against a total marketing spend, I think that's a really good one to look at to say,
Mhm.
okay, we can see the ratio overall. And then I think, to your point, being able to couple into that and 30% of that revenue or 50% of that revenue actually came from stuff we did, potentially originated a couple of years ago. That really helps,
Mhm.
sell that story of, that branding, that participation in the community goes a long way to future revenue. I just when I think of like the conversations we get into with clients or even ourselves on spend, right? It's kind of always comes down to like, well, what are we getting out of that thing, or or is this going to move the needle from a revenue right now perspective? And I think being able to put your data in place in such a way that you can identify these were opportunities that are really driven from marketing programs from a while ago, and then I think that informs your your strategy to say, if we had near-term revenue, like people that raise their hand on a Google keyword search or on a direct response, more on a direct response basis, can we ramp those types of campaigns up? Is it possible? Because within a calendar year, you're going to want to hit targets, right? So it's all good to be driving lead flow that close in a future year, but you also need to close revenue within an existing year. So those are two different strategies, that were really important, especially if you can measure your pipeline that way.
I definitely think some of your pipeline's measurable. I was reading, I think actually listening to an interview with the marketing leader over at gong.io. And he had an interesting comment. I kind of think we would veer towards this as well, which is there should be a percentage of your marketing budget that's not attributable, meaning that goes to brand and awareness. And he was pretty direct and vocal about, we don't know how to measure it. We don't even bother. I can't remember the number exactly. It might have been 10 to 15% of the budget. The rest of it goes into more programmatic, whether it's LinkedIn, trade shows, and they have ways to say, okay, did a trade show, or maybe not trade show in these times, but we did a program and we can see what we got from it. We can measure it. And so I think that's probably the right balance, and every organization might have different weightings behind that. But that makes a lot of sense to me, because in a lot of industries, particularly on complex and long sales cycles, you have to just be there to have the credibility to get the lead in the first place. And generally, if you show up as the new hot player with these things, you don't have the same credibility and sort of reputation required to drive that conversation forward.
Yeah, and I think it's something we were talking about before we officially kicked off the podcast, sort of the difference between that brand awareness and that intent. And, part of the, one of the things, Kev, you said is, one of the great things about digital marketing is there's so much you can measure. And, a couple of years ago, there was almost the mantra that we can actually measure everything. But now here in this discussion, we're saying, well, actually, when we're talking about brand awareness, you can't necessarily measure everything, but you're going to have to take a leap of faith and say it's worthwhile the investment because it is driving things we can't necessarily measure. So let's just be comfortable with that and focus on the areas where we can measure. And that's a lot more in the intent or the hand raising, Chris, that you've talked about. And that is the more measurable aspect. And you think about that from the hand raising perspective. There are so many ways that you can see that hand being raised in so many different ways. And that's where you want to really focus on saying, that's what I can measure, and that's where I'm going to focus my attribution.
So the I word, because I'm glad you brought that up, because that's really where I think a lot of this is going. And I said this to a number of clients, and I think largely they all agree, but some of them have this semi-visceral reaction where they say, oh, there's just no way I can float that to my CEO. And I say, you only have two metrics that matter. It's the number of viable, valid, legitimate opportunities created and the number of opportunities closed or revenue won. That's it. Everything else are indicators. And you can't go to your CEO and say, I drove 50 MQLs. He or she will say, so how many of them are opportunities? And that's the real number and the starting point. But the I word or intent, this is really it. And we're seeing it a lot. And I think marketers in 2021, 2022, and beyond, their roles now, I think it's going to be assumed that you are deploying levels of brand and awareness across all your programs in the industries and over the TAM that you need to. What's really going to make or break good from bad marketers are ones that can really go and understand levels of intent. And perhaps intent itself, whether it's first party, third party, that's another podcast down the road. But I think at a really high level, a really good marketer is going to be able to say the following actions that we've been able to uncover, be it from the source of the lead or the kinds of behaviors we're able to still monitor and track. This is indicative of a lead that's super engaged. We know enough about them to say, sales, now this is worth your time. And when you could actually call this a viable sales opportunity, that's really it in a nutshell. And whether it's forms you have on your website or some other data you've managed to procure that suggests this, it's going to be stringing together that data to really tell that story. I think that's where the trend of marketing is now going.
Yeah, I agree. Why don't we talk about source versus touched a little bit, or did you want to weigh in on this one, Chris?
Well, the only thing I was gonna add to what Kevin was saying is that the we sort of coined this term, one of our previous podcasts as well, the realization funnel, right?
Mhm.
Like as opposed to the sales funnel, the realization funnel basically gives you a sort of a look at those that could be customers or could be someday closes,
Yep.
but there's no budget or timeline that's identified.
Mhm.
Used to be I would have 10 or 15, like a small number of pipeline accounts, because I needed to have timeline and I needed to have budget. If I didn't have those two things, the old BANT thing, if I didn't have BANT, I didn't have, I wasn't talking to anybody about it. I wouldn't be I wouldn't bring it up. Now it's a much different thing, because if somebody already has a budget and a timeline, you're probably out of the deal. It's probably you're probably late.
You're probably late.
You're probably late to the deal. So you could still win it. You could steal it, but more than likely you're too late to the deal. So your pipeline now, your realization funnel has got to be much larger, and that's going to be 75% driven by your marketing team. Your marketing team is going to help you kind of get those prospects into the funnel before all those sort of BANT identification things have come to the surface.
So
Yeah, I
when
like
you
that.
say marketing, I don't think it's exclusive to the 2 or 3, 4 people within the marketing team. I was actually thinking this as you were saying. I was thinking it's actually more about like your organization, your reputation, and what you stand for. Because you might have someone in a non-marketing capacity who's building brand and awareness. Perhaps it's in a partnership. So it's not really like a marketing program type way, but it's still getting the name out there. It's associating with the right audiences. It's doing the things you need to do as a company to be in those right spots. So like maybe it's partner development or things like that, even channel, because there's a lot of really strong channel managers out there who are building super tight relationships with the right players. And that's every bit as key in my mind as a really good marketing campaign.
But I think what you're talking about, Chris, is like, because you're kind of going more brand and awareness.
Like a
level,
little,
right? Yeah.
I'm just saying marketing's more broad than say the 2 or 3 people.
Oh,
whose
yeah.
core
Yeah.
responsibilities are those things.
But I think if I understood sort of where Chris was going, you were saying that, your pipeline should be a lot larger now. Like, and of course, then you add brand on top, and it's even, it's even larger from that perspective that you've got to be investing in. But the actual number of names and the activity that you're driving is to your point, like, if you want to be there when the need arises, you have to be, in that position. I think that's really good, because I think we've, through solutions selling, we've all heard that 10% of your audience is actually active in a deal with a budget and a need identified, and they're ready to go, right? So really most of the market isn't. I think when we talk about source versus touch, if we want to switch gears a little bit to that, I think it's hard to pick channels because everybody's fighting for the same bit of revenue, right? They're saying, hey, we want to go do programmatic display, and we won all those deals, and they're kind of attributing all like their spend to the full revenue, and then whoever's running your Google is doing the same thing, and there's all this crossover that's occurring essentially. And I think that's where you were going with source versus touch, to whereas if you can actually measure where it came from. So why don't you go in a bit on that?
Sure. One comment I had before that I sort of wanted to eke out is, I think you can look at things individually on these highly measurable digital channels, but often what's not taken into account is we look at them as sort of single silo channels, but they all kind of play a role together. So to just remove one of the links, we're not doing Google anymore because we didn't see anything there, but we're doing all LinkedIn now, or switch over all the budget. And I don't think it's as clear or black and white as we will just go with the one that works. Like, in the conversations rarely have well, what does the bigger picture look like of this go-to-market and strategy, recognizing they all play a role in that. And so that's the first thing I think of, where I'm like, and I don't know how to actually truly articulate it or display it in a way that everyone says, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. But I think it's marketing isn't the promotion of brand or service across a channel. It's a much bigger value proposition and story told across all of the channels you can.
Yeah, and I think
for your audience.
exactly. And I think it goes back to this ability to have the right type of people or resources to run the attribution to begin with, right? Because if you're just looking at, last touch and the revenue that came in off of a channel, then it's not telling the full story. So there's a lot of, I guess, sophistication to some degree to be able to pull all that together and be able to say, well, we do have some deduplication work, to be done here. And actually these ones were really and truly, channel specific and only channel specific, and there was no crossover. But these other ones are like, we're having multi-touch all over the place between the channels that we're running. So I think being able to do that helps tell that story, right? And I think if you're not leveraging the digital programs in such a way that give you that ability to even have multi-touch, like maybe you're not doing remarketing or you're not doing cross-channel lookalikes or the ability to sort of market to your customers on different channels, then likely you're at a disadvantage anyway, because you're just looking at like one thing and one thing only. But even within that, I think you can still pull out numbers that suggest, this conversion came 180 days ago. They were at the website. So then it starts to give you a sense of, okay.
Not everybody wants to actually deal with the other 90% though, eh? Like
no, they don't.
There are some that just give me that 10% that's interested in doing something now, and it's like they'll just like pour it all into Google Ads, and that's where that's the full marketing budget, because all they want to do is they want to get that keyword in there. They want the prospect to kind of enter that in, because that means that they're going to have probably have a decent closing rate. But now, well, anyways, I don't want to get into the whole Google thing right now, but
maybe they will.
But it's such a huge flight risk in my mind. For one thing, you probably don't achieve the scale and velocity of sales by going solely hard on one channel or one tactic. The other thing from a business risk perspective is, what happens if those rails, which you don't control, change? What if Google changes the algorithm and then all of a sudden you're just wiped out on a month that you've become very reliant on a single source? Like, it's ideally you diversify the sources in which you engage your audience and hopefully pull in leads, so that if ever Google does do a switch up, an algorithm change or whatever, you're not hit quite as hard, and thus your sales team aren't all of a sudden going from overfed to starved. Right. That would be the worst case scenario, I think.
And I was just thinking about that conversation from another perspective when you're thinking about intent, right? So obviously if you're thinking about PPC and you're thinking about where you are in the funnel and that intent being really clear. But I think of, I don't want to say smarter marketers, but maybe more advanced marketers who are going to be looking at this concept of intent, where it's going to be a little bit broader, right? So you're able to look further up the funnel, and maybe there's less competition there, because if there's such a huge percentage that are focused on those more, closer to close ones, but if you have the ability to step back and say, you know what, I'm going to be listening for intent at a higher level up in the funnel, there's going to be a bigger opportunity. Maybe there's fewer people playing there.
It's going to make you a better sales team.
And I think a lot of it, depends. It'll dictate your messaging, right? In terms of, right. If you want to draw people in, you sort of look at, well, what problems might they have in the future? What's the type of, you start to like really inform your messaging strategy. So if you say, we're a basement renovation company, well, you don't just make a decision to renovate your unless you're like you said, in the market, budget qualified, ready to go. But maybe it's next year, maybe it's 2 years from now, but you're running ads constantly with some sort of challenge, which might be, the timing around getting it done is always kind of like a concern for homeowners, right? So you pick that thing and then you run with it, because that's the type of top of funnel brand awareness that's going to eventually draw people when they're ready.
It'd be an interesting metric to measure. This would be hard. If you looked at all of your won deals over a period of time, quarter, a year, and you said, how many of them were what you call in-market deals, i.e. you were pinned against 2 or 3 comparable service or solutions, and how many were
I've heard of you. I remember that ad from last year.
And there wasn't really competition. It was like, if I do this thing, I'm doing it with you, or I just don't do it all.
Rob and I were talking about that
Yeah.
this morning, actually, because I was thinking about the ones that I could rhyme off, deals where the hand got raised off of a newsletter or an email. Hand gets raised, and the point was that the person had been consuming our stuff for years.
Right. It actually shows that your sort of go to market
Mhm.
is actually working more than just really targeted programmatic. We at our previous org, we were on the Forrester wave for technology, right? So you're deemed as one of the top 10 leaders.
Mhm.
So naturally, you're invited to every RFP for that particular solution because they say, well, let's just bring all of the leaders together and then we'll start vetting them from there.
Mhm.
So you can't really say, well, our go-to-market's really working because you're just identified in that group. So, but you're in a bake-off every time.
Right.
Whereas we weren't in those kinds of deals,
Right.
we weren't sourcing it from the ground up because they're just plugged in, they're
Right.
engaged, and some of that's measurable, some of it's not.
But in the case, when we talk about how important it is to get up earlier in the funnel,
Mm-hmm.
then what you can eventually do, and this is obviously what our objective potentially could be, is to have some predictability. So when we get a PPC lead that comes in that's like, this person is ready to go,
Mm-hmm.
and we can close them, that's good. Like, I mean, that is good, but I didn't predict that 3 months ago.
Sure.
I didn't let you
No.
know, hey, that deal's coming in 3 months.
No.
And so it puts a lot of pressure on the organization. Whereas if you've got that predictability, because you're dealing with the 80% of the funnel or the 90% of the funnel in an ongoing way, and you're able to leverage the data and
Mhm.
able to personalize that data so that
Mhm.
you're speaking the right language to all the various segments of your TAM, then basically you're going to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to be able to roll this kind of revenue each and every month. Scalability,
Sure.
predictability,
Good point.
which is where I think we want to be,
Yeah.
and where we want our customers to be.
Okay. So anything else you want to throw on the table for this one?
Just maybe one thing, because we didn't quite get to it, which is the sourced and intent. I kind of went on a different direction.
Oh yeah, you did. Source
Um,
versus touched.
Source versus touch. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Intent versus touch. I do think a lot of marketers are they're very focused on understanding what was that original source. Robin, you mentioned it earlier in this podcast, and I think touched is interesting too. The one thing though is I just don't think marketers will have any credibility if you go to a sales meeting or like a management meeting and say, yeah, we touched that deal that closed. We've been really doing a great job. Like, I think that's an expectation, and sales isn't going to appreciate if their deals are sort of claimed by marketing as, well, we had these fantastic newsletters.
Right.
So I think it's really about marketing being able to show a level of what came from marketing originally that cultivated into a legitimate opportunity. And maybe that takes time, and you've got to be able to show that. But that's where marketing builds credibility. And the one thing now we're seeing
100%.
predominantly, I would say, in high growth, probably tech companies, more so than other industries, is top marketers are now being held accountable to a level of commit as far as how much pipeline are you contributing from marketing into our sales pipeline. And then even from there, some of the probably the more the higher growth or like faster moving companies, they're probably holding marketing to a level of revenue quota. How much can you commit to? What percentage of our total rev quota can marketing actually source from opportunity creation into revenue one? I've seen 15 to 25% in some cases. You likely have resources, talent, and budgets to support that, but I think that's where it's going too. And so when we talked about the I word, the intent, so that's there, being able to figure that out. Because if you can figure that part out, then the sourcing is going to make a lot more sense. Yeah. And most marketing leaders will probably be pretty comfortable saying, well, yeah, I'm comfortable putting a 15% commit on what I do and what I drive into our funnel. And if it's any good, sales is probably pretty good with that.
Yeah, well, it goes back, and then it just ties back into Chris's point about the forecasting and the predictability that really starts at the very top of the funnel.
And I think it takes time, and that's the other comment that you made, is that if you do it right, then you have a snowball. You have a pouring over
That's
into
it.
your pipeline of deals that you can forecast and you can understand them. But if you're coming in and you're building a program or you're building a department, you're not going to be able to show a lot in 6 months. You might be able to tackle, the 10% in market, really test that messaging out, and then but when you think of the brand messaging, it's a tough conversation to be able to go to the board or the CEO and say, yeah, we're spending all this money and we've got early indicators of a pipeline growing, and we can see some attribution to our TAM, but we're not seeing the revenue yet.
Well,
And
obvious comment, because you're right, that's not easy. So in doing that, you're going to find out a lot about that organization and management as to whether they really believe in marketing and give you enough time to ramp up that side of the house. But the other part is you're going to have to be crystal clear as the marketing leader or the would-be marketing leader, how you will show these things, like what the measurement actually is.
Yeah.
So that everyone's actually on board with A, what you're doing, and B, what you say you're doing in 3, 6, 9 months later. Otherwise, you're probably going to have a lot of uncomfortable meetings.
yeah, you'll get, wouldn't be good. Let's put that way.
not the funnest.
Wouldn't be good. All right. Well, I think that's a good first podcast back in the studio.
We're back.
In the studio.
We are
The
back.
podcast studio. You can rent this studio if you want from us. We've got a podcast as a service.
But it does come with the Goose digital logo, right?
Yeah.
It's the one thing.
We can't.
We can
cover that up.
upsell a customized corporate logo.
Yeah,
Good
and we
choice.
can switch the banner out behind Kev.
All
Yeah.
right.
So we're going to be doing this every 2 days. We're going to ramp up the volume here.
Wow.
Ramp up
So
the
yeah,
frequency.
sense of brand awareness just going through the roof.
We're
here.
going to
Right.
invest in deals 5 years from now.
Mm.
Okay. Put the investment in up front.
No discernible way to measure.
No. That's your job. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Cool.
Bye.
Cheers.